You weren't born weak. You were just taught to survive by shrinking. The moment you began to show intensity, the world handed you a mask. They told you to be polite when you wanted to scream, to be patient when you were being erased, and to call your silence maturity when it was really just self-abandonment. They never asked who you were. They only praised how well you complied. But there's something beneath your stillness, a quiet rage, a fractured presence, a kind of ghost that watches your life unfold but can't seem to intervene. You feel it in the pauses between your conversations, in the fake smiles you give out of habit, in the fatigue that follows even the smallest task. Not because you're lazy, but because you're performing a version of yourself that you don't believe in. This is not peace. This is submission dressed as balance. And Nietzsche would call it what it is, the slow erosion of will. Because what he understood better than anyone was that weakness isn't always about the absence of strength. It's about the suppression of it. It's what happens when you trade your fire for approval. When you let morality, inherited from fear, neuter your instinct to rise. You think you're tired from working, from adulting, from pressure. But the real weight isn't outside. It's the internal war between who you are and who you're pretending to be. You've kept the peace for so long that your truth has begun to rot in silence, and no one sees it, because you've mastered the art of appearing whole while disintegrating quietly. A recent study from the University of Chicago found that long-term emotional suppression leads to a significant decline in the brain's capacity for decision-making and long-term goal orientation. In other words, the more you silence your truth, the harder it becomes to even want a future. You stop choosing. You start drifting, until your life becomes a string of obligations stitched together by guilt. And here's the part they never taught you. Your weakness isn't yours. It was installed, reinforced, rewarded. Every time you swallowed a boundary to keep someone comfortable, every time you apologized for existing too loudly, every time you ignored your instincts to maintain the illusion of control, you were being trained, not to be kind, but to be manageable. Nietzsche called it the morality of the herd, a system that convinces you that it's noble to be passive, that it's mature to tolerate what breaks you, that it's strong to endure what numbs you. But endurance is not strength, especially when what you're enduring is your own disconnection from who you were before the world told you to behave. You're not lost. You're edited, polished into something safe. But deep down, that wild, untamed force still exists, not because you remembered, but because it never left. It's the part of you that recoils when you're dismissed, that aches when you're ignored, that rages when you're used, that voice that whispers, "I was never meant to be this quiet." And Nietzsche would say, your redemption begins the moment you stop negotiating with your own damnation. You've been calling it peace, but it's actually paralysis. This calm you carry, this stillness in your tone, it's not serenity. It's what's left after you abandon your fight too many times. You no longer argue, not because you've evolved, but because your voice got tired of returning to places where it's never heard. You no longer resist, not because you've accepted things, but because resistance without recognition becomes a form of self-harm. And when you look in the mirror, you see someone who functions, who smiles, who shows up. But you also feel the quiet horror of a life that's been stripped of edges. Nietzsche didn't believe weakness was some flaw of nature. He saw it as a product of manipulation, of power systems that neuter the will in exchange for social order. He who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises, he wrote. The idea being, even in your self-loathing, there's still a flicker of consciousness that remembers you were once whole. But the problem is repetition. You've played this role for so long, peacemaker, overachiever, empath, the one who understands everyone, that you forgot that none of these are ever your identity. They were shields. Elegant, useful, invisible shields. Until they became cages. You weren't supposed to keep everyone together. You were supposed to stay together. But that version of you, the unfiltered one, the raw one, the one who didn't ask for permission to feel, was slowly replaced by a persona that doesn't scare people, that doesn't confront, that doesn't take up space. And you did it so well that now, when you think about reclaiming your fire, it feels wrong. It feels dangerous. It feels like betrayal. Because the world has convinced you that your authenticity is aggression, that your clarity is arrogance, that your desire for more is selfish. But what if the real betrayal is continuing to live like this? The University of Pennsylvania published a study in 2022 proving that people who consistently repress legitimate anger and frustration show higher levels of cortisol and long-term risk of autoimmune breakdown. In simple terms, what you call keeping it together is slowly breaking your system apart. This isn't emotional instability. It's your biology revolting against the mask. And if this is hitting a nerve, if some part of you knows exactly what I'm describing, then I need to ask something small, but real. If this space, this message gives voice to what you've been burying, help me keep it alive. Subscribe to the channel, like this video. It might seem small, but it's what allows this to continue. This isn't content, it's confrontation, and I can't keep doing it alone. You think you're exhausted because life is demanding, but the truth is far darker. You're exhausted because you are constantly at war with your own will. Every morning, before you even leave your bed, your instincts are already negotiating with your conditioning. What do I say to avoid tension? What do I feel that won't be too much? What version of me is safe to show today? This isn't stress. This is self-erasure, performed so often it starts to look like maturity. Nietzsche had no patience for this illusion. He saw it as spiritual suffocation. To him, life was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be intense, volatile, overflowing with power and contradiction. He wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." That tribe might look like your family, your culture, your workplace, your relationship, and every time you adjust your truth to remain acceptable to them, something essential within you is amputated. It doesn't bleed, but it rots. We've been told that the ultimate goal is peace, but Nietzsche would argue otherwise. He believed the goal was power, not over others, but over your own direction. Because without it, what you call peace is just sedation. That constant fatigue you can't shake, it's not burnout, it's betrayal fatigue. The toll of living against your own will so consistently that your system starts to short-circuit from the contradiction. You get sick, you get foggy, you feel numb in moments that should electrify you. You overthink joy and apologize for grief. You confuse your fear with your conscience. There's a word for that: disintegration. It's not poetic, it's clinical. Researchers at Emory University have found that prolonged suppression of authentic emotional response correlates directly with decreased activation in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and emotional meaning. In other words, when you consistently override what you feel to maintain harmony, your brain starts to forget how to choose. You become someone who survives by avoiding life, not engaging with it. And the irony? You still think that's strength. You still call that being balanced or reasonable. But Nietzsche would call it exactly what it is: resentment turned inward. Because when your will is silenced, it doesn't disappear. It festers. It becomes envy, bitterness, silent sabotage. You smile at people who drain you. You cheer for their wins while secretly praying for their downfall. Not because you're cruel, but because somewhere along the way, you were forced to trade your voice for their approval. And your soul never signed that contract. And that brings us to a terrifying question. How many of your relationships are built on a version of you that no longer exists? You're not in conflict with the world. You're in conflict with how much of yourself you had to kill to be loved by it. And until you stop negotiating with the parts of you that are tired of dying quietly, you'll keep calling this suffering normal. But it's not. It's a form of spiritual suicide. The truth? You don't need rest. You need rebellion. Not loud, not destructive, but internal, steady, unapologetic. The kind of rebellion that begins when you stop asking if it's okay to exist fully and simply do. You've been told that maturity means letting things go, that wisdom means smiling through discomfort, that being the bigger person means never demanding to be seen. And so, you shrink, thinking it makes you noble. You hesitate, thinking it makes you wise. You stay silent, believing that this is what strength looks like. But it's not. What you've called growth may in fact be learned submission. What you've labeled as balance may actually be emotional self-neglect polished into virtue. Nietzsche despised this illusion. For him, the gravest mistake was to mistake weakness for morality. He wrote, "The weak are always forced to lie, to suppress their truth. They call this virtue." What he's saying isn't cruel, it's clarifying. Your restraint isn't always a sign of evolution. Sometimes it's just fear dressed up in ethics. And worse, you've been rewarded for it. The quieter you became, the more people called you peaceful. The more you tolerated, the more they labeled you wise. But deep down, a part of you has been screaming for years, and no one noticed, because your performance was flawless. But here's the psychological cost. The more you lie to preserve peace, the more unstable you become. A 2022 study from Columbia University found that chronic emotional suppression leads to an identity split, where the internal self and the social self begin to operate in contradiction. This disconnect not only increases anxiety and insomnia, but erodes the sense of agency. You no longer know who you are when no one is watching, because your worth has been outsourced to your role. You smile when you want to scream. You nod when you want to walk away. And every time you do, you reinforce the same lie, that your needs are too much, that your anger is too sharp, that your truth is inconvenient. But that's the trap. The more you edit yourself to be digestible, the more you disappear. And eventually, people don't see you, they see the mask. And when the mask begins to crack, they don't recognize the grief beneath it. They just call you difficult. So here's the twist no one warned you about. Your biggest fear was being too much. But the deeper pain is realizing you've become far too little. Not by accident, but by design. Because the world doesn't break you in one violent moment. It breaks you slowly, gently, with praise, with expectations, with love that feels conditional, until the person you were meant to be becomes a ghost in your own life. And the most painful part? You did it to protect yourself. You already understand the pattern. You've mapped it. You've named it. You've even cried over it. And still, you return to it. The person who treats you like an afterthought. The job that drains you but feels safe. The silence you wear like armor, even though it cuts you from the inside. It's not stupidity. It's ritual. You keep touching the same wound, not because you don't know better, but because the pain is familiar. And in a life full of uncertainty, familiarity feels like home, even when it's burning you alive. Nietzsche? Man is more afraid of the truth than of death. That's why you resist change. Not because you love your suffering, but because it's the only thing that has never abandoned you. There's a twisted loyalty we develop to our own suffering, especially when it becomes the only language we speak fluently. You've suffered for so long that joy now feels suspicious. Every time something good begins, you brace for its collapse. Every time someone gets close, you sabotage the intimacy just to maintain control over the ending. And here's the hardest truth. The pain has become part of your identity. You wear it like a scar you're afraid to heal. Because who are you if not the one who survives? If you let go of the ache, will there be anything left? Or will the silence that follows feel more terrifying than the chaos you know? A research paper published by Harvard Medical School in 2021 explored this exact cycle, what they call trauma repetition compulsion. It found that individuals with unresolved emotional trauma unconsciously recreate similar emotional conditions, not because they enjoy the suffering, but because they are trying to rewrite the ending. They return to pain in the hope that this time it might end differently. But it never does. Because healing doesn't come from reliving the wound. It comes from stopping the ritual. But stopping requires something brutal. Abandonment. Not of people, not of jobs, but of the narrative that says you deserve less. The myth that your worth is tied to your endurance. The lie that peace is something you have to earn through suffering. It isn't. Peace is not a reward, it's a right. But first, you have to be willing to disappoint the people who loved your silence. To break the cycle, you must be willing to walk away from the comfort of your own self-destruction. The path out is not paved with understanding. It's paved with rupture, with boundaries that feel like betrayal, with decisions that make you tremble, with the terrifying act of choosing yourself, not just once, but daily. Not because it feels good, but because you finally realize that continuing the pattern is killing something sacred in you. You are like a temple, built with precision, intention, and sacred geometry. But something happened. Over time, you stopped inviting presence. You stopped cleansing the dust. You stopped lighting the flame at the center. And now, that temple remains standing, but it's hollow, decorated with memories, haunted by silence, beautiful from the outside, but abandoned on the inside. That's what happens when you live too long in a life that no longer honors your essence. You remain functional, even admired, but spiritually, you're vacant. No one tells you how disorienting that feels. To be praised while decaying, to be needed while slowly vanishing, to be surrounded by people who love the version of you that never says no, never demands, never disrupts. You've become architecture, impressive, stable, symbolic, but empty of fire. And Nietzsche warned about this. He wrote, "The most perfidious way of harming a cause consists of defending it deliberately with faulty arguments." You've done this to yourself. You've defended your passivity with logic, your isolation with stoicism, your compliance with emotional maturity. But deep down, you know it's a fraud. Not because you're fake, but because you're starved. You weren't built to be neutral. You weren't meant to float through existence in grayscale, checking boxes and pretending it's fulfillment. You were made for fire, for clarity, for rupture and rebirth. But somewhere along the way, your soul stopped receiving permission to interrupt the routine. You buried your desire under responsibility. You turned your boundaries into shame. You turned your brilliance into restraint. And now, you walk through your own temple like a tourist, touching the walls, remembering how it used to feel to belong there. A 2023 study by UCLA found that individuals who maintain high-functioning social lives while internally suppressing authentic emotion exhibit signs of cognitive dissociation fatigue, a condition where the brain consumes disproportionate energy simply to maintain the emotional split between inner truth and outer behavior. In plain terms, your burnout isn't from doing too much. It's from being too little of who you actually are. You don't need rest. You need reconsecration, a return to the sacred center of who you were before the noise, not through rituals, affirmations, or dramatic life changes, but through one brutal decision, to stop hiding from your own magnitude. You are not meant to be a vessel for everyone else's expectations. You are meant to be inhabited by your own presence, your own clarity, your own rage, your own softness. All of it. And yes, that will confuse people, because they've only ever known the version of you that tolerates, that agrees, that bends. They've never met the version of you that says no without explanation, that leaves the room without guilt, that protects the flame without apology. But that's the version you were always becoming. The one who lights the temple again, not for anyone else to see, but so you can feel warm in your own bones again. And maybe that's what power really is. Not dominance, not achievement, not control, but presence. undeniable, unapologetic, self-lit presence. A fire no longer waiting for someone else to give it oxygen. The parts of you that you've hidden didn't die. They adapted. They waited. Then now they move in silence, guiding your choices, shaping your fears, selecting your lovers, and triggering your collapses. This isn't fate. It's avoidance with a mask. What you refuse to confront doesn't disappear. It becomes the architect of your reality. Jung said it clearly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And Nietzsche? He simply called it cowardice, when a person chooses comfort over transformation, even while burning on the inside. Your shadow is not your enemy. It's your mirror. Every time you're drawn to someone toxic, there's a reason. Every time you sabotage a good thing, there's a signal. Every moment you feel stuck despite knowing better, it's not stupidity. It's the shadow knocking, asking to be seen. You've spent years healing the surface while ignoring the source. Reading books, meditating, doing the work, but still the same cycle, still the same numbness, still the same echo of collapse. That's because your healing was polite. And the shadow doesn't respond to politeness. A 2022 paper by the American Psychological Association noted that individuals who repress aspects of identity in early developmental stages often manifest high-functioning instability in adulthood, thriving in outer roles while self-destructing emotionally in private. This disconnect is rarely visible, but it haunts everything. It haunts the smile you force, the bed you dread, the career that looks good but kills your soul one deadline at a time. You keep calling it confusion, but it's actually a lack of integration. You've rejected your aggression, so it becomes bitterness. You've rejected your need, so it becomes clinging. You've rejected your pride, so it becomes people-pleasing. And while you polish your persona, your shadow keeps writing the story from the backseat. But here's the shift. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be recruited. It wants to be part of the team. Because buried in that rage is your boundary. Buried in that jealousy is your compass. Buried in that fear is your deepest intelligence. The goal isn't to be pure, it's to be whole. And that wholeness requires confrontation, not through force, but through acknowledgement. Through sitting with the uncomfortable without running. Through asking, what have I been too afraid to admit about who I am? Because only when you stop fearing the shadow does it stop controlling the script. Jung once wrote that the real path to wholeness begins not when you find answers, but when you stop running from the questions that haunt you. The ones that tighten your chest at night. The ones that echo in quiet rooms, asking you why you're still pretending. The ones that no one else can answer for you. He believed that true freedom required confronting the very parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. Not to fix them, but to see them, to reclaim them, because what you repress doesn't die. It becomes the force steering your life in shadows. And Nietzsche, he wasn't interested in comfort. He had no use for hollow optimism. He said, freedom is the will to be responsible for oneself. To be free, then, is to stop blaming the world for the pain you refuse to process. It means carrying your scars without apology. It means speaking your truth even when your voice shakes, even when it costs you approval, connection, or comfort. Because what you lose in false acceptance, you gain in something far more sacred. Integrity. You've been waiting for someone to finally understand you, waiting for the right time to change, waiting for permission to feel what you've buried. But what if that time never comes? What if the world never gives you the safety you're hoping for? Would you keep shrinking forever? Or would you finally decide to step into the fire, not because it's safe, but because it's real? No one's coming to save you. Not because you're unworthy, but because this is your reckoning. This is your threshold. You keep calling it depression, emptiness, burnout. But maybe what you're really feeling is the consequence of abandoning yourself for too long. You've become a master at maintaining appearances, while your soul quietly bleeds. You smile on the outside, while your truth starves inside, and still you wait. But the door has been unlocked the entire time. You just didn't notice the key. You stepped over it every day, distracted by the noise, sedated by routine, numbed by the comfort of what's familiar, even if that familiarity hurts you. You've grown so used to disconnection that the idea of coming home to yourself feels dangerous. But that's where healing begins. Not in light, not in bliss, but in the courage to stop walking past the key. So if any part of this has echoed in the places you thought no one could reach, then leave something behind here. A word, a sign, a gesture. Leave a comment. Subscribe, not for metrics, but for memory. To remind yourself and others that you are not alone in this unraveling, that there are others clawing their way out of the same collapse, that this isn't just a video, it's a mirror, a whisper, a rupture. And one day, when the silence inside you becomes louder than the noise around you, you'll bend down. You'll pick up that key. You'll open the door, and you'll realize the prison was never locked. It was you who forgot how to leave.